dental school. I actually was secretly hoping to beat Stevie out for the best man role, so I went ahead and took a liberty to prepare a speech for the occasion. About this time last year, my brother got married, but never formally asked me to be his best man. I learned of this special honor from my date, who read on their wedding site that I was supposed to be their best man. So I had to scramble and come up with some appropriate words. I vowed never to be underprepared for the best man speech again. When I was informed that the date of Andy and Steph's wedding was moved up, I began work in earnest on this speech. But sadly, I learned that not only would I not be the best man, but that I would actually not even be invited to the wedding at all. The wedding ceremony. I was invited to the wedding party extravaganza, which I'm very thankful for. It's all good though. I totally understand they're wanting to have a family-only wedding. True story. My dad decided not to invite any of his extended family to his wedding after one of his aunts, the widow of a former banana boat captain, no joke, got up and began morbidly toasting several of her dead relatives at his brother's wedding, which is the year before. I'm kind of getting a little off subject here, as I usually do. But I'll get back and I'll talk a little bit about Andy and his relationship to Stephanie. So it's hard for me to specifically focus on something to talk about Andy. I could talk about his tardiness to any event not involving food, and how that tardiness has been compounded exponentially when Stephanie came into the picture. I used to give Andy a 15 to 30 minute window to meet somewhere, but then I quickly learned to tell him to meet me somewhere and then I'd show up an hour later. But now I'm strongly considering just giving him a date instead of a time. Perhaps my favorite characteristic of Andy is his calmness under fire. In the heat of the moment, when quick action is needed to avoid disaster, he instead tends to take out and ponder the meaning of the situation. One of my favorite stories occurred when Andy was cooking at my lake house and a pot caught on fire. Instead of becoming frantic, he stared at the fire for a couple minutes, and this was it was a huge fire. I didn't think a pot could catch on fire like this, and it was a huge fire. And instead of going nuts, he looks at it and then slowly turns to me and says, "Hollis, we're going to need some water." Another time we were crossing a busy street in Baltimore at night. Andy had an injured knee, which we found out was an ACL tear. It was an ACL tear. Before the formal diagnosis, his parents had told him to just walk it off, as they usually do. So Andy was obediently trying to follow his parents' instructions and was hobbling behind our friend Jason and I. Well, Andy was a little further behind than we realized when all of a sudden a car came barreling out of nowhere. And Andy, instead of, like the normal person would do, would try to hobble faster or maybe even dive out of the way, just slowly turned and stared at the car. It was like a deer in headlights. I suppose he was thinking about his short life and the meaning of what it all meant. Of his short life, and I guess he looked like he decided to accept his fate. Fortunately, though, Jason and I were able to get to him in time and get him out of the way. All jokes aside, though, Andy, he just seems to take what life gives him and make the best out of it. And I think we could all learn from his example. I know I certainly have. I'm so happy for Andy that he found the love of his life in Stephanie. I don't think that there's anybody who isn't completely convinced of this fact. I wish I had more time to talk about Andy in my speech, but I think I've taken up a little too much time already. She's definitely one of the most fun and giving people I've ever known. I don't think that Andy could have found a more perfect person for him. So please, everyone, I forgot my glass. If you could raise your glass to toast Andy and Stephanie and their new life together. May each of us find love in our life as strong as the love that Andy and Steph have found in each other. Cheers.